Ferrari is considered one of the most notorious serial killers in Switzerland. Between 1971 and 1989, he shocked the country with a series of murders that left the entire nation horrified. His crimes were unimaginably cruel and cold-blooded, far worse than the darkest nightmares. But could one man really be responsible for all of this? That's what we'll try to uncover today. Trigger warning. This video covers cases where children are the only victims. If this topic triggers you, please stop watching now. On Saturday, August 26, 1989, a fair took place in the small Swiss village of Hagendorf. Hagendorf is a small village with few residents, and on the evening of the fair, almost the entire village was gathered at the festival grounds, including little Fabienne Imhof and her family. In 2008, the village had only 4,500 inhabitants, and it would have been even fewer in 1989. 8-year-old Fabienne was thrilled by the many rides and the colorful lights of the fair and was eager to visit again that evening. While her parents dined at a nearby restaurant, Fabienne set off with a friend to explore the fair further. In a small village like Hagendorf, where problems are rare, the parents trusted that the children would be safe. When it was time to return, the girls were approached by a man with glasses who offered to take them back to their parents. The man told Fabienne's friend to wait for him at the fountain and led Fabienne toward the edge of the forest, far from the fair. Panic erupted when Fabienne's friend reported what had happened to her parents. A massive search began, but unfortunately, the lifeless body of Fabienne was found just a day later. The investigation revealed that Fabienne had been abused and strangled that night. The police focused their investigation on the nearby city of Olten. Thanks to the friend's description of the man's face and glasses, the suspect, Werner Ferrari, was identified and arrested. The investigation continued to fully resolve the case. However, this was not the first murder committed by Werner Ferrari. Let's rewind time. Werner Ferrari was born in Switzerland in 1946. At the age of 4, he was placed in a children's home because his mother, who was only 18 at his birth, was unable to provide him with a stable and loving home. This early separation left a lasting mark on Ferrari's childhood. He later lived with his mother and her partner for a time, but he would later describe this period as one of the most traumatic in his life. Ferrari portrayed his mother as emotionally distant, noting that she never gave him hugs or other signs of affection. At the age of 12, Werner was placed in a reformatory. By this time, he was already neglected and unkempt, and his behavior reflected that. Psychologists at the institution diagnosed him with a personality disorder. Rather than stabilizing, his condition worsened over the following years. He became increasingly socially withdrawn, and by the age of 16, had begun setting small fires, stealing, and displaying troubling behavior toward other children. Early signs of a problematic tendency were already apparent, which would have devastating consequences later in his life. At 19, he was finally admitted to a psychiatric facility as his behavior became increasingly alarming. Yet despite the early warning signs, no one could have predicted the horrifying turn of events that was yet to come. Now we are in 1971, 18 years before Werner Ferrari kidnapped little Fabienne when he abducted 10-year-old Daniel Schwab at a fair. In a brutal crime, he murdered the boy by suffocating him. Daniel Schwab's body was soon found by the police, and Ferrari was quickly identified as the perpetrator. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison for this murder, but due to good behavior, he was released early after serving only 8 years. This decision proved to be a tragic mistake. In 1979, after his release, Werner Ferrari returned to society. Keep in mind that he only served 8 years for this horrific crime. He continued to show a disturbing interest in young boys, which had already been noticed before. In 1980, a shocking series of murders began, with several children disappearing or being found dead across Switzerland. These crimes spread fear and horror throughout the country, and Werner Ferrari became the focus of investigations far too late. Over the following years, children continued to disappear from Switzerland. Some cases remain unsolved to this day. All of these children mysteriously vanished in Switzerland. At that time, there was no ability to conduct DNA analysis in Switzerland, which significantly hindered the investigations. You have to imagine that it was much more difficult to identify the perpetrator or perpetrators because of this. The Swiss police stated that the murderer had acted with extreme care, leaving behind almost no traces. Even FBI agents from the U.S. assisted the Swiss authorities in their search for the killer. The case of Christian Widmer was eventually featured on the TV show Aktenzeichen XY Ungelöst, the European equivalent of the U.S. show America's Most Wanted. It was through this broadcast that Werner Ferrari's name first came into the focus of the investigation. Yet despite all the leads, another tragic incident occurred 2 years later in 1998. The abduction and murder of young Fabienne Imhof, as mentioned in the first chapter. After this horrific crime, suspicions against Werner Ferrari intensified. Following his arrest, Ferrari ultimately confessed to 4 murders, including the murder of Fabienne Imhof. In 1994, the first day of the trial against Werner Ferrari began, but was abruptly halted when Ferrari denied all accusations. His statement was, "I have never touched a child in my life." He also claimed that he had never seen Fabienne Imhof before. This led to his previous confessions being inadmissible as evidence. Investigators were nevertheless surprised, as Ferrari had revealed information during interrogations that only the perpetrator could have known. The police were convinced that he was responsible for other crimes as well. 6 months later, a second trial took place, where Ferrari was once again charged, this time in connection with the 4 cases he had previously confessed to, as well as the murder of Ruth Steinman. However, Ferrari remained cryptic in court, and at times refused to speak. He stated that he would not kill in that way, which could be interpreted as implying he might kill in another manner. At the end of the second trial, Werner Ferrari was found guilty in all 5 cases and sentenced to life in prison. Many speculated that Ferrari may have acted out of jealousy toward the seemingly carefree childhood of the victims, a childhood he never had himself. Despite his conviction, doubts remain, as clear evidence was lacking in some cases. The court decided that his retracted confessions and the available testimonies were sufficient to find him guilty. However, these uncertainties raise questions. Was Werner Ferrari truly responsible for all the crimes, or could someone else have been involved? The 12-year-old girl disappeared in 1980 while walking home through the woods. During the desperate search for his daughter, the father claimed to have seen Werner Ferrari. A few hours later, he himself discovered his daughter's body in the forest, covered with a carpet. Later that same year, the father received an anonymous letter containing a photo of the alleged murderer. The man in the picture bore an uncanny resemblance to Werner Ferrari. However, the police did not follow up on this lead until 23 years later, in 2003. The reasons for this delay remain unknown to this day. The photo showed a man whose identity was not known. Authorities exhumed the man, who had died in 1983, to compare his teeth with a bite mark found on the girl's body. Thanks to advanced techniques available in 2003, the comparison was much more precise. Due to the completely different dental structures, Werner Ferrari was ruled out as the perpetrator. The true murderer, who had bitten the child, was the man in the photo, who had already died in 1983. In light of this new evidence, Werner Ferrari requested a retrial. This was initiated in 2007, and in the case of Ruth Steinman, he was eventually acquitted. However, his life sentence remained unchanged. Werner Ferrari is expected to spend the rest of his life in prison. Even though he was acquitted in the case of Ruth Steinman, this does not change his sentence. But what about all the other children? Some cases remain unsolved to this day. We've now reached the end of the video. Werner Ferrari is considered one of the worst criminals ever convicted in Switzerland. What do you think about this case? Could he have been stopped earlier? In my opinion, yes. I believe he was released from prison far too early. After his first serious crime, he should have spent the rest of his life behind bars. Feel free to leave me a comment with your thoughts on the video. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you soon with another video. Take care and stay safe.